Hello. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Faith and Freedom. I'm Gerrit Kane, and I'm here to help square a libertarian political philosophy with a Christian theology. And today, I'd like to talk about education, specifically the freedom of education or lack thereof that we currently have in this country. And let's go to Scripture a little bit first here to see what the Bible says about educating our children. So from Proverbs chapter 1, verse 8, we have, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." Not directly, but sort of implying that fathers and mothers should be involved in the education of their children. Likewise, we can go to Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. "Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it." Doesn't directly involve the mother and father there, but we can refer to Proverbs 1:8 and still make the implication that they should probably be involved there. We do have sort of a counterpoint to that in the book of Daniel, chapter 1, verses 3 and 5. But this is more of King Nebuchadnezzar sort of drafting these children up into his court. Probably the parents didn't have much choice in it. It sounds like Nebuchadnezzar told his servants to basically go out to the kingdom of Judah or to the Judean people and kind of just pick those children out, probably take them from the family so they could be brought up in his court. My favorite verse in terms of education comes from the New Testament, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." I think that is a pretty particular instruction to fathers to be involved in their child's education. So where are we at currently in America? We have basically three options. We have a public option, which is run by the government, a combination of state and federal government with a little bit of local influence via the school boards. We have a private option, but in New York State, in most states, that's still heavily regulated by the state, and those children still have to take the state benchmark tests. Likewise with homeschooling. Parents have that option, but there's also a lot of state involvement there in terms of testing, benchmarking, diplomas, and whatnot. So, how did we get to this point? I hate to say it, but the Puritans are to blame here for forced public schooling, forcing parents to send their children to government-run schools. Yet, in the context of the Puritans in New England and the Massachusetts Bay Colonies, these institutions were classical curriculum, so the classics, mathematics, philosophy, oratory, reason, debate, that type of thing, combined with good, solid religious instruction. It was localized, it was efficient. They did raise money through the public fund, through taxation, but like I said, it was very localized in terms of the decision, very efficient, and high quality education. From then, through the establishment of the United States, post-colonial war, we have a steady creep in public education of secularization and also government control at higher and higher levels, going from the local control, which was established in the Puritan communities, to state control, and finally in 1867 we established a Department of Education. And after the establishment of the Department of Education, the secularization and the move away from a classic education to more of a progressive, experiential style of education that wasn't based on learning the basics of mathematics and the facts of history and the classics of literature. It was more towards a choose your own adventure and whatever works for the individual. Individuals like Horace Mann, Henry Bernard, and John Dewey helped steer our education away from that classical model into more of a state-controlled, one-size-fits-all, or not necessarily one-size-fits-all, but state decides what to do with that model. And then in 1979, the Department of Education moved to the Department of, or the Interior of the United States, and really took more of an active role versus prior to that, they were more involved in monitoring. Now the Department of Education directly funds public schooling, and there's just a ton of regulation there. So since the public funding for public schools is tied to enrollment, there's always this tension between public school districts and homeschoolers and people who work for the state in terms of education. So they really don't like, it's not in the best interest of the public schools to have a big homeschool movement. But I would argue that that's probably what we need given the state of the schools today and some of the things that they're bringing in and some of the things that they're pushing out. Prayer in schools is all but gone. Any mention of any sort of creation or intelligent design theory of the earth in creation of humanity is pushed out for the really flimsy theory of evolution that dominates now. You have cultural Marxism creeping in. The whole race debate is basically in the schools, and they're being indoctrinated. Basically, the left policies are what we get in our schools, and we see that. We've seen at least two generations of kids grow up in good Christian homes, go away to colleges after going to public school, and the public schools plant these seeds of progressivism, of statism, of left-wing political agenda, and then the fertile ground is the colleges. So they're away from mom and dad. They can really get these bad ideas cooking. So a few examples of the tension I had mentioned between public schools in the state and homeschoolers. Actually, this area, Buffalo in particular, is sort of a hotbed of the conflict back in 1949, and this is a story from that Faith and Freedom publication I brought last time, and I'll link to it again in this episode. But Mary Turner in 1949 in Buffalo, New York, and her husband had just moved into town. They couldn't find good real estate right away, so for temporarily they basically were camping out at a tourist park. You know, they had their little camp set up there, and it was just sort of an interim thing until they found real estate. But someone noticed that their children weren't in school. They were just, hanging out with their parents. So they called the authorities, and a police officer actually got sent to where the family was staying. And here's the conversation between Mary Turner and the officer. Mary Turner, yes, I have a warrant for your arrest for not sending your children to school unless you have some good reason. My reason is I want to educate my children at home. Why? Don't you like the public schools? Do you care for your children? Asked Mary Turner. Yes, that's why I send them to public schools. That's why I keep mine at home. I care about what they turn out to be. I don't like the product the schools are turning out. Then why don't you work to improve the schools? It might take 20 years to persuade the schools to educate children as I want mine educated. By then, my children would be grown. I have to teach them now, this year, this week, today. They're learning all the time. It would take too long for me to change the schools. Besides, I enjoy teaching them. That was about 70 years ago in 1949. I would argue not much has changed. There's still people of faith that do not like the product that the public schools are turning out. They decide that they don't want their children in that. And like I said, there's still tension because there's funding tied to that. And there's still tension because no matter what, you don't get out from under the state regulation of even your homeschooling in your private schools. And to top it all off, you don't get out from under paying your school taxes, which you don't see a dime of that in terms of your homeschool expenses. It all goes to the public schools. So fast forward to 2017, still Buffalo, New York. A young mother by the name of Kyrie Harris didn't like the product that she was seeing come out of the public schools. So she decided to start homeschooling her kids. Of course, she had to file all this paperwork because it's still regulated by the state and the education departments. So she files the paperwork good on her end. A clerical error by the school district that she filed her homeschool paperwork with led to CPS being notified by the school district that her children didn't check in for school after her mother had pulled them out. Miscommunication caused by the school secretary, but it led to CPS taking the children away from Ms. Harris and an extended court battle for her to get her children back into her home just because she made the choice to homeschool. So the current state of public education and the influence of state and homeschooling is one thing that libertarians are fundamentally opposed to. We want a model of public schools or of schooling in which there is a marketplace of ideas. And my friend Adam Graham, who is a Christian libertarian, he has a YouTube show called No King But Christ, and I'll link to his episode. He sums up basically the libertarian goal in terms of education. We want a drastic transition out of public education to a thriving marketplace of educational options. So we get rid of this one-size-fits-all public school model. We get rid of the government involvement in the school model. Yes, it's a private model. Yes, it'll be privately funded. So how do we help the poor kids? We're going to have to rely on charity. Christians are good at that. Christians have been good at that. In the last 100 years or so, government has pushed us out of the way and basically tried to take those opportunities from us. So yes, we would have to step up in that situation, but I think the market would produce a vast variety of educational opportunities that, depending on what your kids' interests were, you could switch them to one school to another, depending on whether they were interested in science or math or possibly the arts or music. There'd be a lot more opportunities, and I think we would get a lot better quality product. So I encourage you as Christian voters that when you're looking at a candidate, and we're looking at their education policy, I would at least ask them if they would be willing to support the abolition of the U.S. Department of Education. In fact, Thomas Massie has introduced H.R. 899 with a few other Republican co-sponsors to do just that, to basically repeal the Department of Education and hand the control of education back to the states. I believe that would be a step in the right direction, so I would look for a candidate that supports that, or some sort of voucher system, although that is kind of a halfway between what we really want. Vouchers in which parents who pay school taxes basically get a credit and can use that credit at a variety of public school, either a public school, charter school, or private school. Like I said, it's a step in the right direction, but I don't think it gets at the root cause. So just a few things to think about in terms of education, which I hope those of you with children do. And I thank you for watching. I'll see you again on Faith and Freedom next time.